This may be a two-parter, can't help that. Like I said, it's pretty long, but it's very, very interesting. I told my husband the entire story. He listened patiently, as is his natural manner. Finally exhausting myself, I just stopped talking and fell back onto my pillow. What did this statement last week mean? 50 years? I should understand that. I thought it was then I realized that I lost the ability to understand time. I've thought about this fact for years, having come to only one solid idea. It must be the effects of being taken into different dimensions or someplace unaffected by Earth time. I told my husband what was happening. He nodded and assured me if I waited a little bit, it would all go away. My ability to understand the passage of time did return after about 48 hours. For 2 days, I walked around not understanding the world I live in. How much of our existence is based on walking through time? Everything. What a lesson. As well as I wanted to tell the story to my UFO friends, but every time I'd open my mouth to speak, nothing would come out. It just wouldn't come out. I tried quite frivolously to do so. That also lasted for a couple days. Then without warning, I was able to do both, tell time and the story. So I did. From that point, it was 2 years later before these types of extraordinary experiences ceased. During the next 2 months or so, I was put into what I can only call a testing scenario, sometimes nightly by a strange-looking hybrid in appearance. I've studied a woman. She offered me a series of material objects as bribes for some unknown purpose which was never revealed to me. Oddly, the biblical account of the temptation of Jesus came to me. I was presented with vices of every kind, personal and abiding status, movie star, sex, wealth, position, fabulous home in California, who I'd never seen before. I know the story sounds scary, and I'd go to sleep, and the very same woman who I'd never seen before, the break-in incident, would come to me. She'd take me to the various places, all on Earth, and presenting me with stuff, lots and lots of stuff. I saw some incredible but beautiful things on that she showed me. Example, a home in Malibu, California, that had the most beautiful, mouth-watering artistic wood floor I'd ever witnessed in my entire life. And I was an art history major. I'd seen a few art pieces. There were numerous presentations, as well as one was quite memorable. It included piles of naked bodies, high piles, apparently enjoying each other in some depraved manner. That was weird. When I had enough with the tour night after night, I'd say and tell her I had to go home. My instinct eventually was that I had control over the time I spent in her presence. Sometimes I could feel several entities around me. A few had definite male presence. I could not see, unfortunately, but I could hear them. She and the unseen others would respond to my statements of having to return home. I'd hear, "No, you don't." I'd repeat that I had to go and leave. I'd say that I had to get back to my husband. To my husband, completely devoted to my husband, as he to me, and nothing except his or my death could keep us from returning. Things went on that way until I'd wake up in bed in the middle of the night, apparently having won the argument. No sale. The testing period, for lack of any better terminology, lasted a couple of months until I stopped with it. With my husband's help, I finally told him what was happening to me. He suggested that I take a look around the environment and see what I saw. He was correct. I was being duped. What did I see? I was inside a glamour, and just outside the glamour, I could identify concrete-like floors surrounded by the appearance to be a huge empty warehouse-type environment with really, really high, narrow windows along its top, maybe 40 feet plus from the floor level. The environment was just as strange as the experience. Finally, I understood the way to get rid of them, myself, from this on-demand situation, over which she appeared to have absolute control. I jumped on the new information in a flash. Despite being controlled by anything or anyone, however, I saw, even in my inexperience, her weakness, and her actual ruse became my husband's directions. Outdoors, perfect day, white tablecloths, shade trees, potted flowers, and on the street-high bistro setting of sorts. At that time, I was seriously a foodie, always in search of the best food experience. Apparently, no. She sat in front of me with Charlie Sheen, the actor. Yes, very weird. The sexual tension was engulfing, almost smothering. I suppose they thought I found him alluring because he was in my head after watching returns of 2.5 Men. Not. I looked around me to identify the glamour as my husband had directed. Yes, it laid there just beyond the scenes in which we sat. There again was a grayish concrete-like floor. This time beyond that was a strange curved vehicle with hoovering like windows. As I had done before, I told her I had to leave now. She said that I didn't. I was mistaken. By this time, I couldn't keep from laughing out loud and almost uproaring. She was so serious and emotionless. It was then that I knew I had her. You know what they say about sales? The person who walks away has the power. I got up, said politely goodbye, and began to walk away, telling her I had to go back home. As emotionless as she had been, at that juncture she almost seemed to show fear. I read her reaction as somewhat frightened and a little panicked. Strange, and if my behavior was reflected on her somehow. The reaction I read was very, very subtle. I did not understand. I do not have particular skills set I'd like to not have noticed, but I did because I do. She coaxed me to return, waving me back to the table with outstretched arms. I continued to laugh uproariously and walked away. As I circumvented what appeared to be that odd parked vehicle, I spoke to her over my shoulders, telling her she should find Charlie a date before he burst open with sexual tension. Not exactly saying in those words. I was quite coarse with her. The next thing I knew, I was in my bed in the middle of the night, awake as always. That was the last time I saw her. Testing was apparently over. My husband had been correct. Whatever purpose she had in mind for me, I think she failed her test. During this testing period, my husband was going through different kinds of testing in the real world. I mentioned before that he was ill for some time. He was taking several serious drugs, had gone through several types of procedures and surgical operations. His body is a mess from the impact damage he received on missions around the world. One of the drugs he was taking was Coumadin, a blood thinner. He'd been so ill that he very nearly died 3 times before we left that particular New Mexico house. He could injure himself and be completely unaware of it due to his neuropathy. Consequently, I was taking his blood pressure and temperature twice a day, as well as checking his naked body daily for any skin breaks or bruises, all risk from Coumadin mixed with the other serious pain medication. I thought the weirdness was over. Nope. 6 months, almost to the day, after the bug broke in, I came home from my morning dance class to find him in his chair reading. As always, I went into the bathroom to bathe and make the bed. When I lifted the pillow, I found 3 distinct circular spots of blood with a semi-smear around in between them under the pillow. I shouted him, asking if he'd had a nosebleed, although I couldn't see how the results would be under the pillow instead of on top. He said no, but I should come look at something. He was holding out his left hand, palm down, when I reached him. On top of his hand was a perfect round circle about the size of a notebook punch hole, exactly the same size circle as the blood on the bottom sheet. The spot was red but smooth, as if an old scar had opened yet had and not faded. I asked him what it was. He said he didn't know, but it was much redder before. He was on the drug Coumadin. Whatever was done to him did not heal and clot, and it would have on a healthy person. Hence the evidence. There is a little doubt in my mind. This is the only reason the blood spots were transferred to the sheets. I sat down on the edge of the bed, dropped my head into my hands, knowing what terrible, stinking feelings. I could not protect my family. I felt totally defeated and somewhat fearful that I was in the mercy of something over which I had no control, and its powerful silence and completely unknown to me. I was truly, truly worried, and I'm not a fearful person. I'm the type, spit in your eye type, who resonates with you. Want my gun? Come and get it. As expected, the red spots on his hand was completely gone by later in the afternoon. It was during this phase of his experience that I went shopping at Michael's art department. I'd been waiting for a special canvas sale. Then I directed the interaction with an undeniable telepathic couple, one male, one female. Strange stuff. I was truly without words in the situation. But another story. They looked human, except for their hips. The fact that they read my mind, the hips were not right on either of them, way too thin for any male or female human. My husband's health worried me, as mentioned above. He's very nearly died 3 times during the next 18 months, but the weirdness did not cease. However ill he was, he agreed we needed to sell the house and leave that location. The huge power lines that ran behind our neighborhood were affecting both of us. He's quite sensitive to open energy of any kind. Later, when we resettled, he said he felt that the house was making him more ill every day. Consequently, we sold in April 2012, and we couldn't find a home, so we were willing to purchase. So we spent 5 months traveling and visiting friends in Colorado and New Mexico while conducting our search. During the period, we rented an old refurbished adobe in Taos, New Mexico for a month. It was there that our next series of experiences began. The Sharpei people, I named them, they lived on our 20 acres of heritage land owned by the family and was almost in town. Our puppy barked at every tiny movement of every coyote, squirrel that rustled on the property. He was truly diligent and immensely annoying. We didn't sleep after arriving because of his various insanity. It was summer, hot, no air conditioner in the house, hence the floor to ceiling were always open. If the bed squeaked, and it did every movement we made, he popped up, listened, and barked incessantly at nothing, simply because he heard a noise. I was sure I was going to commit suicide or murder before we left the location. The first week of our stay, I woke up to find 5 small, thin, dark brown people staring into our bedroom from the outside, the flooring to the ceiling windows next to the bed. They were huddled together, peering as a group. They had small, round, intensely blue eyes, undershadowed by a reddish hue. The red only served as a further intenseness of the blueness. The eyes were set in a wrinkled face that could only be compared to a Sharpei dog. They looked absolutely ancient. I felt as if I were dreaming because of the otherworldly feelings in the room, as if we were another dimension, and can't explain that statement. I sat up in bed, looking at them, watching me. When they suddenly disappeared, I shook myself away from everything and walked around the bed's footboard to ease my tension. Our puppy was sitting straight up in an attention, leaning against the wall on one shoulder. He appeared to sound asleep, sitting in an upright, awkward position. I called his name. He didn't move. I said it again. Nothing happened. Finally, I touched him, and he roused himself, looking at me as if he didn't know where he was. He stumbled to move as if drugged. I picked him up and crawled back into bed, holding him next to me. We fell asleep. I never saw the Sharpay people again. Or perhaps I just didn't have a conscious memory of it. Who knows? The thing I do remember is that they felt like good people, curious good people, not like the pale-faced female and her insect buddies, who clearly felt like liars and deceivers. In the end, I decided to bring my husband back to New Mexico because he was not faring very well. He had established doctors in New Mexico. To this point, I was desperate to find an apartment, home, or which to live in and settle down. I feared he'd die if I didn't do so quickly. We arrived in Albuquerque on Labor Day, the weekend of 2012, to stay with a friend for an interim until we could find a home to purchase or rent. Luckily, I found our next home the very first day back. We made an offer, contracted, and were waiting to close in less than a week. Not a single soul outside our host knew where we were. No one. We had contacted no one by any means. On the second day we were in the town, the strangers began anew, but it was in our friend's home. I woke up with great concern about my husband around 3+ a.m. In the ambient light, I could see he was lying on his back in an awkward position, his neck thrust upward. The top of his head looked as if it were stuck in his pillow, pushing his neck out. The same thing occurs when an infant is laying to sleep and its little head is not adjusted after placing the baby flat. Not good. The position would pressure on a previous surgical site of his. I jousted him a little, getting him to repose his head and relieve the pressure. All he could say was how much his throat hurt. He never ever complains, but I could see this throat, of course. It was dark, and I was so very sleepy I could barely stay awake. Not unusual. Don't sleep well or much. I went back to sleep for an hour until our dog woke me up to take him out. When I returned from the backyard, I found my husband barely awake, but still complaining about how much his throat ached. He said he didn't have a sore throat. It was his neck that hurt. Too dark to see properly, I turned on the light. What I found was absolutely creepy. There was blood, a lot of blood, on his pillow. He was still on Coumadin, a blood thinner. There was blood on his hands, especially his thumb and forefinger, where he had been rubbing his throat. However, there were no open wounds that would account for any blood loss. By this time, our friend and homeowner was awake and asked what was going on. He provided a flashlight for a closer examination. I located our camera. I took pictures of the pillow, his hands, and his throat. Just above the supral notch is a soft spot at the base of your neck. There was what appeared to be a possible puncture mark surrounded by a bit of red. In the middle of the mark was you could see with the naked eye. When I enlarged the digital image, I found something more. There appeared to be a semicircular mark intersecting the puncture plus pus spot. It looked like an old incision. How weird is that? Was an incision made and healed in one night? Good question. To enlighten about their social structures, I have no explanation as why this occurs, as I have no memory of ever seeing grays at any time throughout the entire 2 years of our madness. When I awoke, I felt as if my head would literally burst open. It was so full of information, it ached. Even weirder was that within the information, I discovered I'd been made a serious job offer. I swear, as ridiculous as it sounds, there was a job offer inside the information. It made no sense to me. The job keyed to a very personal talent of mine. Historically, I used my talent to influence businesses, corporations, and educational institutions in order to do good for others. Most everyone has a hidden special talent, and these entities keyed into mine. A girlfriend once told me that her special talent was the ability to tell if a hemline was off by 1/4 of an inch from 50 paces. She's a clothing designer and streamers. For me, I can listen to her person's stories about anything at all. This translates the truth, meaning, and emotional intents of their discord into written language and with complete accuracy to persuade. I do this by getting rid of stories' deepest emotional value that allow the reader to connect. I do it by observation of the person's emotional state and at the time of the storytelling by watching the words come from their lips, what is the distressing and or reassuring, as well as body language. Simply, I can easily convey the teller's intention, even though it may remain unstated, plus discern their central emotional truth through reading them as they relay the story. It's a unique skill. I've used it to assist others who wanted to achieve forward movement in their careers and lives. It's a tiny gift, but I'm happy to share it. I never ever misuse my gifts for profit. My grandmother would say, bad juju. It meant to be given freely. The job I was asked to be translator, and I'm quoting here for people. Man, what does that really mean? I thought, who are these people? All my relatives have been dead for years, and I, like most others, am a mixed breed of humans. All my family is dead, many prematurely due to bad life choices. I'm the family survivor, the only geographical tribe, if you can call it that. I've never been a part of an annex into a larger city many decades ago. It no longer exists. So much for kilts and knee socks, huh? Although I was reared by a very Christian, in a Christian Southern Baptist church, I am not a Christian. I do not hold with organized religion of any type. I find it unconvincing, given my firsthand knowledge of our world's place in the universe. When Christians find out I'm not one of them, the question they always ask me is, what? You don't believe in God? My response is, no, I don't believe in God. I know there are greater entities than humans, although the word God, as presented by this earth culture, does not fit me these days, too small of a box. There's a difference between belief and knowledge, a wide abyss. I call my God the all that is, or source, which encompasses everything that exists, not just earth. I do not believe in the earth God at all. As presented, I know it's all a lie to gain control over humanity. When I told my husband what had happened and what I was offered, he asked how I responded. I said I didn't. Even so, I will say that the job was very cool, exciting, and stimulating, a lot more stimulating than anything else I'd ever done on this planet. No matter, I knew I awoke. That was a carrot at the end of my very big stick. Knowing this had come from it to date, as far as I know, continuously, these entities have not returned to our home or messed about our lives. They did return. I'd refuse offers so that it would be presented again. However, they are, I know, and I think that they are. Primarily questions about entities' experience was why they spent so much time trying to convince me I should take their offer. Seemed to be overkill to me. There is something I didn't get then and still don't. I have a theory that it's beyond the scope of explanation. It all seems rather counterproductive when looking back on it, however. I have been told by one who has actually worked with the Greys that these entities are rather stupid and extremely slow because their world is built upon hierarchy, structure, a conquest culture. All permission comes from above. She has Nazi in parentheses. Even when making the slightest change or modification to work assignment, they embrace an inflexible top-down organization. Maybe that's why the very white, chopped black woman's hair looked almost afraid when she waved me back to the table. Did she face retribution for failing to achieve her goal, to recruit me? What was her goal? I have to assume it was to flip me away from the light, whatever that they were. They clearly had nefarious intentions. Bottom line, until further information is available, I find these entities, whatever or whoever they are or were, to be deceivers who will say anything that they need to assess you to hear and bribe you with whatever you may crave. They look for weak-minded, whatever they believe you want to experience or possess: power, money, control, excitement, success, fame, influence, a top choice. They will offer it to you. If you like, you don't take the bait. Apparently, they go away. I hope forever. I was never afraid of them, as well as I neither believed them during the experiences they provided, nor do I now. When UFOers who have turned ET Lord and experiences into religions have told me that grays are just misunderstood, I say, bless your heart. That's okay, for you are an idiot. And then she says, we moved into our contracted home in New Mexico 2 weeks after the ET download event took place on our friend's home, and we're there for 8 years. In fact, we sold the house in early 2020, just in time to escape New Mexico's fashionism. Many, many strange things that happen in the house, as always, with no biggie. Neither of us is put off by high strangeness. It's been part of our lives for so long. We are curious people by nature. We share an interest in the pursuit of all knowledge. That vein, we know that's the world's strange and mysterious place. Neither of us is so arrogant as to think we have handled our life experiences like so many others who walk through this convinced of belief, and then there's a blank and says, well, you fill in the blank. Nevertheless, to my knowledge, there have been no new visits from my unknown species or even dreams of them, and you know I'm fine with that. However, the job offer would have been a wonderful experience with positive and compassionate entities and humans. It fit into everything I am. They knew it. However, I think it's interesting that it took them 2 years to find my focus. They finally found it, but no, I didn't want anything from them then or now. If I know nothing else about these strange entities, I know this: they are attempting to forcibly circumvent humanity's free will with alongside the current ratcheting up of tyranny. So what she's basically saying is, don't take the bribes, don't do anything, and if you get caught up in stuff like this, your best bet is to stay really strong and not give in to it. So I hope you had a great time with this, even though I stumbled over some words, but it still is a very good story. Take care, and I'll talk to you soon.